In this video, we're going to walk through how to build a secure MCP server that uses Descope for authentication and Skyflow as a PII vault. And most importantly, how roles and permissions from Descope can map directly to Skyflow roles using Skyflow conditions. By the end of this video, you'll see a live Claude session accessing PII where fields like date of birth are automatically redacted or masked without any application-side logic. Let's start with a quick overview of what we're building. We have an MCP server that Claude connects to. Authentication is handled via Descope as the authorization server for the MCP server, which can pull roles from an SSO provider or from roles you define manually. Skyflow acts as the system of record for sensitive data, and instead of hard-coding access logic in our app, we let Skyflow enforce data access policies like what fields are visible or redacted based on roles passed in at runtime. The key concept here is Descope and Skyflow's ability to work together using Skyflow's secure token service to exchange a Descope token for a Skyflow token mapped to a specific role that is using Skyflow conditions, such as checking whether the viewer role of the Descope token exists in the request context. So to get started, the first step is to actually set up your MCP server in Descope. As part of the new Agentic Identity Hub, you are able to define MCP servers as templates right here. And as you can see, I've created an MCP server template called Skyflow MCP server. I've enabled CIMD and DCR. I've given it a single scope, as well as assigned the user consent flow to this MCP server. Now, the only thing you actually need to protect your MCP server with this resource server template is to take this issuer and put it in your MCP server. It's worth mentioning that Descope can also integrate with SSO providers like Okta, Azure AD, or Google. But for this demo, the important part is just showing the basics of roles. So what we'll do is, to keep it simple, I've created a viewer role here in Descope at a project level, and the user that I'm signed in with here, I have assigned the viewer role. This role could come directly from your SO IDP, or it could be assigned manually in Descope. Either way, once the user authenticates, this role is included in the auth context and passed to your MCP server in the access token. Now let's move on to Skyflow. In Skyflow here, I'm using this quick start vault, and this quick start vault has quite a bit of data. As you can see in the persons table, it has information like name, email address, date of birth, SSN, and state. Now, what I want to do in Skyflow is I want to be able to define a data level access policy rather than custom application logic, and be able to create a role such as marketing that has specific policies associated with it. So what I'll do is I'll go to access, and as you can see, I've actually created this marketing role already. This marketing role here has a few different policies. One is the date of birth of the person must be masked. The SSN will be fully redacted, but the name, email address, state, and Skyflow ID can be returned in plain text. And as you can see, what I've done is I've assigned this role to my Skyflow service account that our MCP server will use when communicating with Skyflow. At this stage, the service account has access, but we haven't made it dynamic yet, or haven't associated this Skyflow role with the Descope viewer role. That is where conditions and STS come in. So on top of what you've seen so far, you will need to both create an STS config as well as assign a role. Now, this is something that is documented in detail in the description and links associated with this video. But in general, you will first need to create an STS config that has an issuer that, as you can see, is formatted with the Descope project ID you have and v1/app/customize ahead of it, as well as the public JSON web key URI, which is your base URL of Descope /your project ID /wellknown jocks.json. You'll also need to add this roles to your context claims. This roles is the claim that has your user roles in it in the Descope token. This can also be at a tenant level, so you may have to adjust this according to the context claims that you want to pass through to the Skyflow STS token. You also need your service account ID and account ID, both of which can be found in the Skyflow console. Finally, the bearer token is simply the access token that you can generate right here, which will give you management API access. Once you've done that, then you have to assign your role and create a condition so that the viewer role, which is mapped from the Descope token to your STS token, will be associated with the marketing role within your Skyflow account. And so what you need to do is you need to click on Access in your vault, click on the marketing role that you want to associate, and with this role ID, associate this role ID and paste in your service account ID with a condition like this. Something like viewer in request.context.roles. Once you've done that, any user that has the viewer role in the Descope token will automatically have that context in the token passed to the Skyflow token, which is then mapped to the marketing role, and all of the associated marketing role policies are enforced. Now, let's quickly walk through the MCP server code to see how all of these requests come together and how we are actually using Descope and Skyflow within the MCP server. If you go to this MCP server, which will be linked to in the description where you can clone, you can see that you'll need these various environment variables, which we've documented on the Descope docs page. You will need to use OAuth token exchange to exchange the Descope token with your service account ID for an STS token. And that STS token will then be passed through to your MCP tool. Your MCP tool here will do something like get Skyflow records. It can be structured in such a way where you can provide the name of the table that you want to get the records for, things like that. And then you can see here, what we end up doing is we end up building this API URL with the table name requested to simply fetch all of the data with that STS Skyflow token. Relatively simple. The MCP server itself will be protected with Descope Auth. We'll have all the modern authentication methods, and Skyflow will act as the database and PII data store. Now, let's look at a live demo with Claude to see end-to-end how Skyflow and Descope work together to provide secure auth for your MCP server and expose data securely to an agent that's stored in your Skyflow database. So I have the Skyflow MCP server here, which I will connect to. And as you can see, the first thing that comes up is our Descope MCP server auth flow. So I'll go ahead and sign in with my account that has the viewer role. And the next thing you'll see is a consent screen, which will have the human readable description of the scope that I requested, that I configured in Descope to allow access to Skyflow data. I will click authorize, and Claude will now be connected to my MCP server, as you can see here. And so now I'll make a request. I'll ask it to return all the data in the persons table. And then once the token is exchanged, it'll return all the information. And as you can see, that information has the redacted date of birth, just as the marketing role intended, but has all of the other information that we expect. To summarize, with the power of Descope and Skyflow, you can leverage Descope authentication with modern authentication methods, scoping, CIMD and DCR support for your MCP servers, while combining the appropriate level of protection for your PII, especially when using it with an agent or an LLM.